I'm here with Robin Dvorak, who is the CEO of Blue Egg Marketing, who I've been looking forward to speaking with for a long time because at some point after COVID, she became a digital nomad and she's currently running her company from her RV in Florida currently, which serves as her office and her home. We're going to hear all about how she balances her life on the road as the CEO of a marketing agency. Robin, it's great to have you on Road to CEO.
Thank you, Will. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So before we get into your experience as a digital nomad, I'd love to hear more about Blue Egg. So tell us what is Blue Egg all about?
Well, Blue Egg is the marketing department for small businesses, and we help small business owners punch above their weight class by providing on-demand or partial CMO and marketing support services. So we find that companies of a certain size, regardless of the industry they're in, the owners have a tough challenge because they're trying to hire in marketing support. They may be only hiring one person, and as a marketer, it's tough to be the only person in your organization in marketing when there's so many things to learn all the time. And for the business owner who's already wearing many hats, it's really difficult to be able to be a good guide to a marketing person and provide that kind of leadership and support at the same time that you need to get the marketing work done. So we find that we plug in as a part-time fractional marketing department, and we can help a company grow through stages and put together repeatable, sustainable processes and technologies so that they get to a size, we hope, where they can justify financially the investment in full-time staff, more staff.
I
So
see.
we like to work ourselves out of a job.
Okay, all right, that's very interesting. So do you see these engagements then as temporary kind of engagements where you're helping the client grow, and that's really what you like? You want to start off with your client at a certain size and maturity level, and you want to graduate them at the end?
We do. I mean, I describe the company and what it is, but it's been a journey to sort of to be in this place. I think when I started Blue Egg, I was fresh out of venture capital and investment banking firm that were focused on the technology space, and we were in the Northern Virginia. That's where we met in the technology space. So I thought, oh, there's a moment where companies are taking on new venture where marketing becomes, a place where they're about to spend some of that money that they've just raised, and there's some important decisions to be made before deploying or investing in marketing. So I thought that's the space where I can play. But I was quickly being referred to these other business owners who are having this challenge, and we have engagements now over the past, what has it been, 17 years, I think. Where we've worked with companies for a very short period of time, where it's just it's a project. They really just need that help to get started. And with others, we've worked with them for months or even years. And in some cases, we've worked with companies where we worked with them for a period of time, and then we paused our services, and then they call us back a couple years later and say, "Hey, we're entering a new market, or I've got a new product, or I've got this marketing challenge. Can you come back in?"
Mhm.
And since we're already read into the company, it's very easy for us to turn back on. So it's kind of unique, not in from the idea that if your choice is hire a full-time person and either that person stays with you or leaves the company, or you hire us and we know your business, and you can sort of turn us on and off like a knob. It provides a lot of flexibility. And so yeah, we often, more recently we work with companies that are just getting started, people who are just starting their businesses, and they need to do those fundamentals, and whether it's branding and messaging and their website, and they need everything just to get off the ground.
So you've got a perspective that goes back it goes back 17 years on this. So what year did you remember? What year did you start the company?
2008.
2008. Wow. Okay. So was that before or after the financial crisis started?
It was before, but I think that where I was in our firm in Updata, I think we had a kind of idea of the headwinds that were coming, and we were taking actions. And the company that I was with at the time was a venture capital firm and an investment bank in one. Updata had two companies functioning under the one umbrella brand. Those two companies were breaking apart and were going to be separate entities. Neither one of them really could justify a full-time marketing director in either company. So I found myself with the opportunity to say, go to another, maybe a larger venture or private equity firm in a marketing and investor relations capacity, or get plugged into one of the portfolio companies that we were working with, in a CMO kind of a marketing capacity for startups or for freshly funded companies. But it was the founders of Updata who put the idea in my head. They said, you have everything you need, Robin, and the experience and the network to start your own thing. And I think that was a really important moment because I hadn't really thought of that approach on my own. But they kind of planted a seed and they became my anchor client. They said, "Well, get you started. You can, you'll be our marketing person, but in this new capacity where you can go out." And so I thought that was a great way to start.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to start. I remember when I first started, I didn't have an anchor client, but I did have a partnership with Google. At the time there was Google Trusted Photography. The
Oh,
that was the program, and I don't remember exactly how I got connected with it, but they sent me all these cameras, and it was essentially the deal was that I was supposed to create virtual tours that would be a part of Google Maps. But it would be on private property. So, the Google car goes on public property, and then trusted photographers would go on private property because you'd have to get permission and what.
inside the building. So that's where you get that views of from inside of office
Exactly.
buildings. That's really cool.
Yeah, and that provided so that it was definitely not an anchor client, but it provided me with this sense of security because I knew that I would always be able to go out and find a good engagement where I created essentially a virtual tour of a business for the business. I'd be able to make some money, and so when I was starting out, that was a really, I think, important partnership for me, just from a cash flow perspective, frankly, and psychologically, it was important.
Sure, of
Yeah.
course. I mean that it's it gave you the confidence to get started. I think
Yeah.
that's yeah, I don't like yeah, and I think it's important.
So when you started out in 2008, can you think back then to how things would have been different from a engagement perspective? Like how you thought about engaging with clients, how compared to today, where technology's obviously shifted. 2008. There were no such thing as virtual meetings like this. We didn't have, I mean, I don't think video conferencing was matured enough to do it, even if you wanted to. And it certainly wasn't a serious thing that people would have taken, that clients, at least from my perspective, I don't think it was. Um,
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember ever doing, it was conference
okay.
calls and things, but
Yeah.
you know, the thing about this technology that's so funny is that I started my career at AT&T, and so we the at least the internal marketing and the internal innovation channels inside of AT&T did see this,
Hmm.
saw this coming. There was I don't know if it was an internal commercial where there used to be like a museum downtown in New York City where you could go, and it was almost like the Epcot Center for AT&T. You could go into the telecommunications of the future and you could see what it was going to look like, and you have these big screens and people talking to each other, and then little screens and little phones that had screens on them, and
Wow.
all of this technology that we're actually using today, and at that time seemed almost impossible. Um, but yeah, I can I go back to 2008 and think about what
Yeah. How?
I think the business model for me was different at that time because
Okay.
I thought, oh, I'll just be an outsourced CMO and I'll plug into whatever team needs me.
Yeah.
And I kind of evolved and I think that's still part of the vision that I have for the company that we realize on a very small scale, that that when we work with small businesses and the way that technology continues to evolve so rapidly, you're constantly having to learn a new skill on a new software that, Canva, for example, came out with its latest set of tools a couple of days ago. And I saw that as I was using Canva, and it just changed the entire layout for me. Like the thing that was up on the upper right is now on the lower left, and you're learning that. But can you imagine if you're a business owner and you have the other things that you're supposed to do as a business owner, and sales is probably primary, and then trying to learn how to use a very tactical tool to get your message out. There's just a barrage of new technologies that a marketer has to learn how to manipulate and become proficient at. And so, we found, working with small business owners, that we were able to provide that because we're seeing this problem over and over again, whereas they may be using email marketing for the first time, and they may think, we may be able to help them decide which email marketing platform makes the most sense for their application, or which email marketing platform is going to plug in well with the other technology that they're probably going to need if they're, in one industry or another. And the other thing about the business that changed for me was that I wanted it to be a bench, large scale ad agencies, for young people coming out of school with their freshly minted marketing degrees. If they go into a large company like that, they will be, well, I I think about it this way. They will be in meetings where they're in
Mm.
meetings with a lot of other people, and they may be charged with taking notes, but they're not actually getting into the marketing. And for us at Blue Egg, and we've hired interns throughout the years. I don't have any scheduled yet for this summer, but most summers I have someone who's coming in to do an internship, do some work. And we give them something to do that is really tactical and has a real immediate impact. So in the morning, they have nothing. At the afternoon, they may have emailed 3,000 people, and they have to click that send button, and all of there used to be, remember the MailChimp used to have like the sweat coming off of the hand that was
I
clicking,
do.
because that's the feeling you have when
I
you're suddenly
remember it so
emailing
well.
thousands of people. You're like, I hope there's not
Yeah.
a typo or an error, or every link is working. But that feeling is so empowering because you're doing marketing, you're communicating, you're trying to influence, you're trying to track a response. You have a goal in mind, and you get immediate feedback in this case of whether it worked or not. So that experience for an early stage marketer in their career is critical. And
Yeah.
we found that with Blue Egg, with small businesses, we can give them that experience right away, and hence the confidence that comes with doing that execution. And so it's a different experience than working at a big agency. And I don't think of us as an agency. I want to think of us as a plug and play.
It's
But
interesting.
and I was just going
But
to say that, just to finish that idea, the opportunity for mid-career marketing professionals is similar. There are a lot of people, and in many cases, women who are want more flexibility in
Hmm.
their work schedule, and the idea that we have a bench that you can come to and you can use your expertise and apply it, but with a little more flexibility than if you're in a 9 to 5 job with a single company. That's a valuable resource for us, for Blue Egg, for the business owners that wouldn't be able to connect with that particular skill set, and also for keeping your resume current. So, like, the idea of Blue Egg at scale is really to provide a bench for marketers, in addition to providing a really high level of support for very small businesses. And I mean small, I mean, sub 2 million, the
Okay.
kind of business where you don't have a budget for
Yeah.
an agency.
That's exactly what I was going to ask was how do you define small business when you're thinking of kind of the core customer that you like to work with?
Sure. I mean, I say we work with small businesses, and I mean small. Like, we could work with a sub $500,000 business to a $5 million business. If you're in that range, that's where you have the challenge that I am most interested in helping with, because there's not a whole lot of other, it's basically a DIY otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, okay, so you mentioned flexibility. So I want to use that to segue into the change you made a few years back. So you were running Blue Egg successfully through COVID, and I do want to return to COVID at some point. But you were running it through COVID, and then you decided you wanted to make a big change. So what was the big change?
Well, I mean, the big change was moving out of my condo in Reston, Virginia, and buying a Class a 30-foot Class A motorhome and using it as my home and office and being able to drive across the country and see the United States. And as opposed to staying in, and I think obviously during the time of COVID is when that became a possibility,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah. So is this something you'd wanted to do for a long time?
It is. It's something I used to talk about at dinner parties. One day I'm going to get in an RV and drive across the country, but it was always something that I imagined myself doing in my retirement. It
Yeah.
was never something that I contemplated that could even happen while I
Yeah.
was working.
Yeah, understandably. I think I probably would have the same thought. So then COVID comes, everybody gets locked down. Did how what were you thinking? Did you immediately start planning, or did it take a while to for you to decide to do this?
Well, there was an external, influence that came about too. Well, I don't know what I'm curious to know what you were doing during COVID because some of the challenges that we found with our clients is that their entire business models had to change almost, I mean, overnight. And
Yeah.
the example that I have is of the business model of the book event company that we worked with, and they brought authors of new books to organizations and a
Mhm.
lot of government agencies for in-person events that were really taking the place
Yeah.
of typical training. Typical leadership training. Instead of typical leadership training, you get the author of a new book that may have been, a New York Times bestseller, but they have a new book out and you get the latest and greatest. And that suddenly just shut down completely. There's no more in-person events. In
Yeah.
fact, several other clients that we worked with in DC that were, we were helping with in-person events that just shut down entirely. At the same time, in my particular, this is not terribly interesting, but in my particular condo, the association had a cap on the number of units in any building that could be rented. It was 80% owner occupied,
Mm.
um, was written into the bylaws.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to rent out your place, you were on a waiting list, and that waiting list was long. So in my mind, I thought, oh, I'll be on that waiting list for 8, 10 years before I even get the opportunity to rent out my condo. Because again, in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm not going to go just buy an RV and sell my house. And like, that would be crazy. Who would do that? What kind of serious person and their, adult does that? But what happened was during COVID, people were staying home. They weren't renting out their places. They weren't going anywhere. And suddenly my name popped up to the top of the list as saying, "Oh, you're the next person to, you have the ability to rent your place out if you want. Otherwise, you go back to the bottom of the list." And that was the spark. I'm like, well, this is the time. Now is the time because now I can do it. So I renovated the condo while I was working and got some tenants in there and off I went. And I with knowing very little about RVing, we weren't
Mhm.
campers or RVers when I was a kid. So I had a big learning curve.
Okay, so a lot of people I know will spend time poring over videos and studying and trying to prepare for everything that could come up in an RV. Doesn't sound like you did that. Sounds like you jumped right in. Is that how it worked?
I think I did a lot of online shopping
Okay.
versus online learning.
Yeah.
And at the time, two of my siblings had RVs, so I could kind of walk around and
That's
see them.
useful.
They didn't let me drive them, mind you. Like neither one of them was like, "Oh yeah, we'll teach you how to drive it." No, they're like, "You can go inside and check it out." But so I did a lot of online shopping and yeah, some video watching. There's just a huge community of people who do this, and a lot of them are retirees. There is a growing number, surprisingly, of women who are doing this solo.
Huh.
I know sometimes that's surprising to some people, but to me, I see women of all ages, especially even older women who have lost their spouses who wanted to continue doing what they were doing with their spouse, and they're doing it on their own. But it really was the white knuckling the steering wheel as I was driving off the lot with very little training. You know, they don't really watch out when you're driving around RVs because you have no idea what level of experience the person has behind the wheel. Yes, white knuckling it and staying in the lane that I could to get to my first campsite.
Yeah. So where did you go first?
Well, I went to a local campground in Jacksonville. So I have family in Jacksonville. I was in Jacksonville at the
Okay.
time. There's a campground that's at the beach. So you park in what looks like the Florida forest. It's really very well covered campground, and from that campground you can walk across the way in the same park to the beach and watch the sunrise. So all of a sudden your real estate gets very, very good. You know, how many homes have you lived in your life where your front yard is the Atlantic Ocean, you know? And all of a sudden the possibilities are open to you. Like your front yard could be anywhere you want it to be, you know.
Sounds pretty nice.
It's within reach. It's within reach. What
So,
about you, Will? What did you do during COVID? How did that affect your business?
for me, yeah, it's interesting. So some of my clients shut down because they were doing in-person classes, children's care, that type of thing. And so for some of them, there was a big chunk of clients that did have to shut down. There were other clients that got their revenue from things like, or, got their leads from things like in-person events. They had
Mhm.
to change those models completely, and oftentimes they would use online channels then that increased what I had to do for them. And then other clients were e-commerce clients that simply saw a lot of growth during COVID. And
Yes.
so I had an interesting kind of mix. But if a client didn't get shut down by COVID, they typically seemed to get helped during the year or two after. Now, all of that is after the 2 months of panic that everybody went through,
Yeah.
and but after a couple months, the panic started to subside and people started to kind of settle into realizing that they were going to have to have their business continue to operate even in the presence of these unprecedented shutdowns. So I was pretty busy during COVID. I did not, and I should say, I was, my company was kind of in the middle of a growth, pretty big growth phase. And so COVID was very bad timing from that perspective. But it was, there was a lot to do. I think we were up to maybe, I can't remember if we were up to 12 people by that point.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, we were growing, and so therefore we wanted to try to keep growing. I know some businesses kind of put things on a little bit of a lower gear for a little while, and it did not feel like we had that option. I mean, there were a lot of struggles that we had. I mean, because with certain clients getting shut down and pressure that put on us. But we had grown so much in the year prior to that we wanted to do our best to try to keep that momentum. It took us a year to recover the lost revenue. And then so I think it was about 13 months later that we were ahead of where we were pre-COVID. So,
That's really amazing. But yeah, I would think that a lot of people were changing their tactical programs and would be relying on you for the first time
yeah,
in that situation. Yeah, that's when we started with events. It became okay, we're doing this on Zoom now.
yeah,
How do we use Zoom? How do we get 30 people on Zoom?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so that type of thing, I was already I was already good on. We were already using Zoom, we were
Okay.
already meeting virtually with people. We were already, because for my business, we've got team members that are all over the world. And so now that's a pretty common occurrence. In 2020, that was less common. And so I will admit that I felt like, yeah, I'm becoming a little less special. I feel that's how I felt. I was like, okay,
Oh,
now I've got to come up with other ways that the company can be special and interesting. And because at the time, we were able to move really fast because we were really comfortable with the virtual settings. And then everybody was virtual, and that efficiency really disappeared disappeared because everybody else was doing it. They weren't efficient and they slowed you down. And so there was a lot. So there was a lot of change that we had to go through because of
Yeah.
COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was definitely not using cameras for phone calls before COVID. That was a really unusual feeling.
Yeah, yeah. So, so did you, so what was the learning curve like? Like, did you have a lot of meetings that you were taking from the RV immediately? Were did that make you nervous? Was it,
Well,
or did you take some time away? Like, did you just kind of put some distance between yourself and work for any period?
no. Oh no. I kept working, but there is a distance from the time that I decided, okay, I'm renting out my condo to 6 months later buying the RV. So I had a lot of time to shop and well, it was maybe 3 months, 4 months later by the time I moved out.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a fast
So
timeline.
it was like October. So I got the opportunity to rent the place out and I rented it out in October of that year. And then I bought the RV in March 4th is when I drove it off the lot of 2021.
Wow.
So there was a few months, and I stayed with family for the holidays. So I was still working. I had the computer. I was now a little bit of a nomad without really having wheels. I was constantly moving, and it makes you decide what you think, what you need. When you're
Mm,
packing for a trip, you put a certain number of things in your suitcase, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to be gone for a week. But if you're moving somewhere, I couldn't do without, for example, my 24-inch, monitor. I need this monitor. I need to be able to see stuff. I need a lot of space. So, you start to make decisions like, okay, well, this is something that's required. Other stuff I can do without, but I can't do without this.
yeah.
Um,
And I
so
imagine you'd have to kind of learn some of that on the way. Like you wouldn't be able to know, I'm guessing, what.
you do, you do. Well, I think the hardest thing about the transition was moving. I was packing up my apartment. Now, you've probably moved several times too. When you're
Sure.
packing up things, you put things in a box and you think, okay, I'll just deal with that on the other end, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm going to have that on the other end. I'll
Right.
find it. In this case, you're packing up boxes and trying to figure out which things you're packing up that you're putting away that they're not going to be
Mm,
needed and which things that you're going to need. And I famously had a very good friend who was helping me through that. Otherwise, I'd probably still be on the floor of my condo trying to decide. And I said, I'm going to need all of my dishes and I'm going to need wine glasses. I'm going to need, because what if people are coming over to entertain, I'm going to need my really big, sangria glasses. And she's like, you're not going to need all that. I said, no, I'm going to need it. So she helped me pack up this box of very breakable glass, and we called it, Robin's cocktail box. And I had that and that made me feel good when I was packing up. I said, okay, I'm not, I'm not giving this up. I'm keeping this. And I got it into the bus. I probably broke two or three glasses within the first, 3 months and said, I really don't need all these glasses. I need two glasses. And then I need plastic, or I need something or metal or
yeah.
something that doesn't break when you're driving down the road at 60 miles an hour and you're trying to keep everything packed and not rattling. So yeah, you learn something, you learn what you required. And for me, it was mostly work. I said, I need an internet connection, I need
Yeah.
my laptop, I need this 24-inch screen, and that's it. And so that was for work. I could do that. And getting a couple of different high-speed internet connections on a couple of different carriers, AT&T, Verizon, so that there's backup in case, one's got better coverage in an area or another.
And
Um,
and do you
yeah.
know if you're going to a new location, are you going to be confident at this point? Okay, I know this place is going to probably have reliable internet that'll handle meetings, or is it kind of a, anyone's guess?
No, I, you know, when I first started doing this, I just assumed. I said, "Well, I'm going to have coverage wherever I
Yeah.
go," And there were definitely a few times where I thought I'd have better coverage than I did, and I had a slow connection. But I actually, I would have phone service, so I might, have to take a call.
Yeah.
But for the most part, unless I'm going to a national park like the Badlands, for example, in South Dakota, where you know that you're out in the middle of the park, there's not going to be coverage, and then you're basically taking your vacation.
Yeah.
And I think that's was that something I was talking with a friend about yesterday. The idea is that when you're finished working, when I turn this computer off and I'm done, I'm at my vacation. Like I'm there, and that could be true anytime. So you're basically, you're on vacation.
Yeah.
I think there's probably been a few decisions that I've made about campgrounds just to make sure that I had coverage when I knew that there was work. But yeah, coverage has not been an issue, and now you can get a satellite, from um oh gosh, the name of the company has gone right out of my head.
Starlink.
Starlink.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I compared that. The price for me is about the same. I haven't gotten Starlink
Yeah.
yet. It's something I might do because it's very easy, but you do need line of sight. So
Okay.
you do need to have a tree clear kind of experience for that. But yeah, that's so that I wasn't ever worried about that because that was just that was going to be I needed that to function.
So with Starlink, as long as you are in a clearing, you should be able to find access. You should be able to kind of get
Yeah.
into it with a satellite and be able
Yeah.
to
If
have.
if you happen to be in a campground in the middle of the woods, you just have to situate that so that you have like a line of sight to the sky.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and pretty much my understanding, it's basically high speed internet from wherever you are. And yeah, they've really come a long way. They've always had an RV option. So
Okay.
I was seeing Starlink at campgrounds from, basically when I started, and it just a number of those increased. I just had chosen two hotspots and I've stuck with them since. So
So was becoming a digital nomad more difficult or less difficult than you expected?
less.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It I think the excitement about starting it, when you're starting something, you're really excited. You're going to meet every challenge with I've got this, because you have the goal in mind. And by the time I got out there, into the middle of somewhere where I might have had a real challenge that was maybe beyond my ability to solve on my own, um, I was already in it. I already was.
Yeah.
So there are things that can happen with the bus that make you, well, you learn that sometimes you have to do the next thing first. You can't put it off. Like now there's something that I have to fix before I can do anything else. So before I can continue on this trip, before I can, I had a hose burst, that has the hydraulic fluid for the levelers. And I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
now I can't get the levelers down. So now I can't get the slides out. So, okay, this is now the thing I'm going to be doing. Like now, all the other things I was going to do, no, this is now the thing that I'm doing. So, so yeah, until you solve that problem, you can't solve the next problem.
Yeah.
So it teaches you to be a little bit linear sometimes.
Yeah. That's interesting though, because I would think that when you're making a big life change, oftentimes there are things that are really unexpected that come up and they present massive challenges. And from what I see online, a lot of people seem to really love this lifestyle. And it sounds like this was, I mean, you just said it was a little bit easier at least than you thought it would be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what surprised me most is that after doing it for a couple of years, I was driving, I was somewhere in Idaho. I'm driving, on my way to Glacier National Park, and I thought to myself, it's about time to have that conversation with my tenants where they renew. And the decision that you have to is, am I going back to my condo or am I going to continue for another year? And I knew the tenants would rent again, but in my mind, I thought it occurred to me that I was never going to be moving back into my condo in Reston,
Yeah.
and that's very surprising because I always thought of this as a little jaunt. I'm going to do this for a year. It'll be an adventure, and I'll figure out how to do it, just well enough to survive a year, and then I'll go back to my place. And I think the surprise was that I don't, there's a lot of stuff I didn't really need. And, you do have these wonderful, opportunities to meet people and see places and get a three-dimensional kind of grounded view of places you read about. When you read the news and you hear about a place, having a visual and kind of having that experience. I don't know, you can't replace that. So that's why I continue doing it. So I say I'm 4 years into a 1 year trip.
And with no end in sight.
No, no, I definitely am doing five. A lot of people say, oh, we think about our life in 5 year increments. We're going to do
Okay.
something, So I thought, well, I might as well do 5 years so then I can say I lived in my RV for 5 years. But who knows what will happen when I get to March of next year?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great attitude. So, did you have to make any changes to how you run the business when you did this?
Well, there are certain types of engagements that would be more difficult for me to take now than, when we were talking about having in-person events.
Hmm.
We're not, I will do, and we do as part of the work that we do for our clients, we might be attending a trade show on their behalf. So I'm still doing that. But the assumption is not that I'm necessarily in the same city or state or even part of the country as our clients. And my colleague right now lives in Southern California. We have clients, all over across both coasts. But when we need to attend a trade show, it's the same as, I have to park the bus wherever I'm parking and go to the trade show. So I don't, yeah, I think I wouldn't be able to take an engagement necessarily where I'm required to be in one place for a long time.
So when you're at campgrounds and other places, do you run into people who are in your similar situation a lot, where that have made this choice? Because in the past, as you said, this would have been something that people would think about during retirement, and that's kind of what you think about sometimes. It's like
Right.
RVs is oh, those must be retired folks. And how often do you run into people who are digital nomads in the same maybe similar phase of life as you?
Yeah, you find well, it is really interesting that there are people out there doing exactly this, where they may be accountants because that's a great profession that you can do from anywhere. Or I've often found that there are couples who are traveling together where one spouse is retired and the other one has kind
Mm,
of been able to take their foot out of the full-time job and be able to do whatever job they were doing with their company remotely. And so it allows them to kind of ease into retirement and maybe even experience retirement a little bit earlier than they would have under other circumstances. Also at the time, I think this has leveled out quite a bit, but traveling nurses you'll find are traveling via RV or across the country. They're going to where they need to be. So certain types of professions kind of lend themselves to this. But ultimately, a lot of retirees, a lot of couples, tend to be on the younger side. And during certain times of the year, in the summer, in the high season, lots of families. So campgrounds are a really safe and open and friendly place to meet people. People are neighborly. People want to help each other out. People keep an eye out for each other, for storms coming, helping people get their awnings in or something like that. There's no shortage of assistance and someone to, roast marshmallows with. So you make a lot of new friends.
very nice. So, in terms of your plans for Blue Egg, what are your thoughts for you think of things sometimes in 5 year increments, perhaps? Do you have a 5 year plan?
I'm that very typically the cobbler's children, Blue Egg. We haven't done much marketing for ourselves. It's been a long time um of referrals. People call, somebody usually says, call Robin, she might know how to fix that, whatever that is, whatever that might be, or she might know how to do that, but yeah, I think if we're going to do something for Blue Egg, the idea of growing that bench and being able to put together something more repeatable. We've had such great experience with um interns who have come in and then they're now off in really fabulous places in their careers, and they worked with us for a summer or over a holiday cycle, and it's really exciting to see where people have landed and what maybe that gave them a little bit of confidence as they started their way. So I'd love to continue doing that and to do it on a larger scale, more um, reliably would mean we would need to grow. But I think I like the idea of us staying small and being very close to the types of businesses that we serve.
Mhm. So, from a travel perspective, do you have any do you have a bucket list of places in America that you want to see, or Canada, or elsewhere that you want to drive
Yeah.
to?
Yeah, so when I started this trip, I'm an East Coaster, and so I knew the East Coast, but I really hadn't spent any time traveling out west. And now I can say I've been to all of the lower 48.
Wow,
I haven't been to
awesome.
Alaska yet, and of course the bus doesn't go to Hawaii, but I've been there. So I've got one more state in the US
Yeah.
to get to. And driving to Alaska is not for a novice. That's apparently a really tough trip. And
Okay.
there are groups of people you can caravan, you can sign up for a caravan that where you have a guide that will help you get through some of the territory to get up to. And that I think there's probably going to be a lot of spots without internet service, so I would have to take a long vacation to do that. So that's not maybe in my
Yeah,
that may be a bucket list item, but it's probably not something I'm going to get to do in the next couple of years.
I love it.
But yeah, I think there's still places, I'd like to go back to certain places. If you haven't been to Yellowstone National Park, my goodness, it is
Yeah.
it is breathtaking. I mean, the national parks, gosh, it's the best money we spend. They're just such beautiful places, a great way to learn about history and geography and geology and nature. There's every single one of them that I've been to, it's like such a treat. And I do have the National Park Service passport and get it stamped, and
Oh,
you
nice.
just so many interesting places. But yeah, I would like to get to um out to the Four Corners. That's kind of one of the goals for this year. Is where Colorado and Utah and New Mexico and Arizona meet.
I see.
So Monument Valley is out
Okay.
there. Great Sands National Park in Colorado. That area I have not been to.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that that's beautiful. I've also not been there, but that's yeah. If I ever uh, become a digital nomad, that'll be high on my list as well.
Well, just don't even wait.
Yeah.
You don't have to do like you don't have to just shut down your entire life and go. There are places you can go to rent an RV at
Okay.
outdoorsy.com, for example.
Okay.
Just like it's like Airbnb for RVs, and you could fly yourself out to, for example, to Utah, and then rent an RV out there and go to Arches National Park and even to Zion, and then return the RV to the owner and fly home. So, and in some cases, RV owners will even take their RV to whatever campground you have
Hmm.
reserved and set it up for you so that you don't have to drive. You really, it's very accessible. You can try this and you can taste this experience without having to, make huge commitments.
Well, that was that you anticipated my question, which yeah, I wanted to know if you had any advice or tips to people who wanted to do this, and it sounds like you can really dip your toe in the water pretty effectively.
You really can.
That's
And I
cool.
and you find a very friendly and welcoming and helpful community to do it, I think. I've got a spare seat. You can come drive with me for a few days.
There
It's
we
fun.
go. All right, I like it. Well, I live outside of Shenandoah, the Shenandoah National Park, which I love. My wife and I love the to hike and have the Blue Ridge Mountain views and all of that.
Oh gosh.
And we've been down here for just going on about 2 years. And so I'm a big fan of the national parks. I think it's I agree with you that
You are near some of the
investment.
most beautiful places. That must be fun to go out and spend a weekend.
It's gorgeous. Yeah, it's gorgeous. We're not big campers, but I would love the idea of doing the RV route. I think that's the right kind of camping for me.
It is glamping. You
Yeah.
don't have to sleep on the dirt. You can still enjoy a good campfire and
Yeah.
some roasted marshmallows and still have a nice bed to sleep in. And you can have a climate controlled environment. So yes,
Yeah. So
um,
I have one final question. So, you mentioned the interns that you like bringing in, and I was wondering if you had any advice for people starting their career or at the early stages of their career in marketing, um, what would you recommend that they do to position themselves for a career?
Wow. Um, I mean, I
Well,
think for, go ahead.
just to add on to that, this is a tough time for marketers. This is a tough time for, I mean, it's challenging not just for marketers, but for everybody because we have, AI tools that are changing the way we work. They're taking tactical skills that maybe somebody would have made a ton of money on, leveraging, and it's making those skills far more accessible with far less expertise. Maybe not at this
Yes.
point. Maybe they haven't eliminated the need for expertise, but it feels like they're on the cusp of maybe doing that for some industries at least. And so I feel like there's a very large number of marketers here, um, and a lot of them are wondering, what should they be doing?
Well, and this is fundamental. We at Blue Egg, we say marketing is drawing a short, bright line between action and revenue. So it's the connection. You are creating a way for someone to trade dollars for value.
Hmm.
And that is fundamental to business. So
Hmm.
I would say that any marketer is also in sales. And certainly having, in the small business marketing world, we do demo calls. We do,
Yeah.
if we're working with a company, we're doing demo calls. So I would say to anyone who's starting their career, of course you have to learn to use all the tools, and you may have the skills, and a lot of things are easier with AI to help you write copy and things. But fundamentally, you're trying to solve the challenge for any company that you work with of helping them to connect with customers. And the fundamental way to track success is that somebody has traded dollars for value. So regardless of what you're doing, I mean, I think everybody in a company is in marketing to some degree, because if you're not, what are you doing? You're in a company to serve a customer. You're in a company to solve a problem for a customer, whether you're building that solution by, product development, or you're, selling that solution, or you're servicing, you're providing customer support for that solution. So the touch with the customer is most important. And it's also the way that you understand how you get paid, I mean, what your value is. So as a marketer, I think it's really important to be able to connect with the customer and sell. I think that's what some people are very um, fearful of, cold calling. I
Mm.
don't know if I could talk to somebody, and yet we find ourselves, Will, in this position of pitching all the time. When you
Yeah.
meet somebody new and you ask them what do they do or what your company is about, you're in that role. So, and you're not physically harmed by someone saying, no, I'm not interested in what you're selling today.
Yeah.
But you
I,
have to go out and try to sell that story. So I think
yeah.
I think for anybody who's starting in marketing, you're in sales. So first of all, rate your own success on your ability to help a customer find a solution that they're willing to part with money for. I know that's very basic, but
That's great advice. I love it. I love it. And
because the money is how you get paid.
you know what? I'll tell you what, early on in my career, I had to make cold calls. It wasn't my first job, but the first company that I founded, was a software company, and I had a co-founder and myself, and we raised capital for it. And that first round of customers, I was on the phone making calls we served universities and charities, and I was cold calling all day long, and those types of clients publish their whole staff directories for the most part. So it's easy to get phone numbers. It was easy to find the people that you needed to talk to, and I didn't that did not come naturally. It wasn't
Mhm.
an inherent skill. I mean, maybe some people have an ability to have no fear of it whatsoever. I found that grew tremendously by making my first 100 cold calls. You lose all fear.
Yes.
You realize that it's just a conversation. Maybe it's a game in some ways, and but it was true growth to be able to and that's an arbitrary number, but that first 100, it totally changed how I thought about business and how I thought about marketing. And so I embrace. I don't think about that experience I had a lot, but I think, yeah, it's a good reminder that you're giving me, and I endorse that 100%.
I do think, I mean, you have to listen to be a good salesperson. If you, and really the basic skills of sales, listening, understanding what somebody wants, and then also don't never promising something that you don't deliver.
Yeah,
So if you say you're going to call them back, call them back.
yeah,
That there's so it really does come down to fundamentals. I would say for somebody who's starting their career, definitely go find the job, even if it's not the job, the perfect job, but do find somebody who you're going to work for who has a genuine passion for solving a problem for people. There's some people that try to go into business because I'm going to make a lot of money if this is how we're going to make a lot of money. And there are other people who start businesses because they say, well, I found this problem that people have and I just have to solve it.
yeah,
So that's who you're looking for. I mean, if you're being interviewed, also make sure that you're doing the interviewing of who you're working for. That
yeah.
I think that's, but finding somebody who's passionate about that will teach you a lot about, what you ultimately want to do.
Robin, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great episode of Road to CEO. I know a lot of people are going to benefit from listening to this. Thank you so much for being here.
It's been a joy and maybe a lot less scary than I thought it would be. Thanks, Will.